Chapter 7 of Breaching the Marianas, The Battle for Saipan by John C. Chapin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. D+20 to D+23, 5 to 8 July. Any Japanese withdrawal meant that some of their men were left behind in caves to fight to the death. This tactic produced again and again for the American troops the life-threatening question of whether there were civilians hidden inside who should be saved. There was a typical grim episode at this time for First Lieutenant Frederick A. Stott in the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. On this 21st day of the battle, we trudged along a circuitous route to relieve the 23rd Marines for an attack scheduled for 1300. A normal artillery preparation preceded it, followed by the morale-lifting rockets, but neither they nor mortar fire could eliminate many cave-dwelling Japs. And again the cost was heavy. Using civilian men, women, and children as decoys, the Jap soldiers managed to entice a volunteer patrol forward into the open to collect additional civilian prisoners. A dozen men from A Company were riddled as the ruse succeeded. This kind of treacherous action by the Japanese was demonstrated in a different form on the following day, D+21. Lieutenant Colonel Chambers described how he dealt summarily with it, and, by contrast, how his men treated genuine civilians who had been hiding. A few of the Japs had played possum by smearing blood of other Japs on themselves and lying still as the Marines came up. However, within the battalion my instructions were, if it didn't stink, stick it. My officers just laughed and said the Marines had bayoneted all the bodies. You had to do it. We also picked up several civilian prisoners, including some women and children. The thing that really got to me was watching these boys of mine. They'd take all kinds of risks. They'd go into a cave never knowing whether there would be soldiers in there to bring out these civilians. The minute they got them out, they began to feed them, give them part of their rations, and offer their cigarettes to the men. It made you feel proud of the boys for doing this. Once the 2nd Marine Division became Corps Reserve, it was obvious to General Smith that the time was ripe for a banzai attack. He duly warned all units to be alert and paid a personal visit on 6 July to General Greiner of the 27th Division to stress the likelihood of an attack coming down the coastline on the flat ground of the Tanapag Plain. General Saito was now cornered in his 6th and last command post, a miserable cave in Paradise Valley north of Tanapag. The valley was constantly raked by American artillery and naval gunfire. He had left only fragmentary remnants of his troops. He himself was sick, hungry, and wounded. After giving orders for one last fanatical banzai charge, he decided to commit harakiri in this cave. At 10 a.m. on 6 July, facing the east and crying, Tenno Heike Banzai, long live the Emperor, 10,000 ages, he drew his own blood first with his own sword, and then his adjutant shot him and Admiral Nagumo in the head with a pistol, but not before he said, I will meet my staff in Yasukuni Shrine 3 a.m., 7 July. This was to be the time ordered for the commencement of the final attack. The ultimate outcome was clear to Saito. Whether we attack or whether we stay where we are, there is only death. The threat of a mad, all-out enemy charge was nothing new to the troops on Saipan. A rifleman recounted one such experience. Whenever we cornered the enemy and there was no way out, we faced the dreaded banzai attack. The 23rd Marines had a few of these during our Saipan adventure, as did all the other outfits. I dreaded these attacks and yet welcomed them, which is quite a paradox. They generated a great deal of fear, but when it was over, that particular sector was Jap-free. For hours, we could hear them preparing for their banzai attack, as it was the end for them and they knew it. Because it was against their heritage, their training, and their belief, they would not surrender. All that was left was a final charge, a pouring in of all their troops in one concentrated place with their pledge to take as many of us with them as possible. His account continued with a dramatic description of the tense waiting he endured, while he listened to the enemy yells and screams going on for hours. The noise increased as Marine artillery and mortars, pounding in the direction of the Japanese sounds, added to the deafening din. The Marines were waiting in their foxholes with clips of ammo placed close at hand so that they could reload fast, fixing their bayonets onto their rifles, ensuring that their knives were loose in their scabbard, all in anticipation of the forthcoming attacks. Listening to the screaming, all senses alert, many of the men had prayers on their lips as they waited. Unexpectedly, there was silence, a silence that signaled the enemy's advance. Then, suddenly there was what sounded like 1,000 people screaming all at once as a horde of madmen broke out of the darkness before us. Screams of banzai filled the air, Japanese officers leading the devils from hell, their swords drawn and swishing in circles over their heads. Jap soldiers were following their leaders, firing their weapons at us and screaming banzai as they charged toward us. Our weapons opened up, our mortars and machine guns fired continually. No longer do they fire in bursts of 3 or 5. Belt after belt of ammunition goes through that gun, the gunner swinging the barrel left and right. Even though Jap bodies build up in front of us, they still charged, running over their comrades' fallen bodies. The mortar tubes became so hot from the rapid fire, as did the machine gun barrels, that they could no longer be used. Although each attack had taken its toll, still they came in droves. Haunting memories can still visualize the enemy only a few feet away, bayonet aimed at our body as we empty a clip into him. The momentum carries him into our foxhole, right on top of us. Then, pushing him off, we reload and repeat the procedure. Bullets whizzing around us, screams are deafening, the area reeks with death, and the smell of Japs and gunpowder permeate the air. Full of fear and hate, with the desire to kill, our enemy seems to us now to be a savage animal, a beast, a devil, not a human at all, and the only thought is to kill, kill, kill. Finally it ends. This was the wild chaos that General Smith predicted as the final convulsive effort of the Japanese. And it came indeed in the early morning hours of 7 July, D+22, the climactic moment of the battle for Saipan. The theoretical Japanese objective was to smash through Tanapag and Garapan and reach all the way down to Charankanoa. It was a fearful charge of flesh and fire, savage and primitive. Some of the enemy were armed only with rocks or a knife mounted on a pole. The avalanche hit the 105th Infantry, dug in for the night with 2 battalions on the main line of resistance and the regimental headquarters behind them. However, those 2 forward battalions had left a 500-yard gap between them, which they planned to cover by fire. The Japanese found this gap, poured through it, and headed pell-mell for the regimental headquarters of the 105th. The men of the frontline battalions fought valiantly, but were unable to stop the banzai onslaught. 3 artillery battalions of the 10th Marines behind the 105th were the next target. The gunners could not set their fuses fast enough, even when cut to 0.4 of a second, to stop the enemy right on top of them. So they lowered the muzzles of their 105mm howitzers and spewed ricochet fire by bouncing their shells off the ground. Many of the other guns could not fire at all, since army troops ahead of them were inextricably intertwined with the Japanese attackers. However, other Marines in the artillery battalions fired every type of small weapon they could find. The fire direction center of one of their battalions was almost wiped out, and the battalion commander was killed. The cane field to their front was swarming with enemy troops. The guns were overrun, and the Marine artillerymen, after removing the firing locks of their guns, fell back to continue the fight as infantrymen. The official history of the 27th Infantry Division recounts sadly the reactions of its fellow regiments when the firestorm broke on the 105th. The men of the nearby 165th Infantry chose that morning to stand where they were and shoot Japs without any effort to move forward. By 1600 that afternoon, after finally starting to move to the relief of the shattered 105th, the 165th was still 200 to 300 yards short of making contact. This tardiness was unfortunately matched by the long delay in the arrival of the 106th Infantry to try to shore up the battered troops of the 105th. The extraordinarily bitter hand-to-hand fighting finally took the momentum out of the Japanese surge, and it was stopped at last at the CP of the 105th, some 800 yards south of Tannapag. By 1800, most of the ground lost had been regained. It had been a ghastly day. The 105th Infantry's 2 battalions had suffered a shocking 918 casualties while killing 2,295 Japanese. One of the Marine Artillery battalions had 127 casualties, but had accounted for 322 of the enemy. A final count of the Japanese dead reached the staggering total of 4,311, some due to previous shell fire, but the vast majority killed in the Banzai charge. Amidst the carnage, there had been countless acts of bravery. 2 that were recognized by later awards of the Army Medal of Honor were the leadership and resistance to the death of Army Lieutenant Colonel William J. O'Brien, commander of a battalion of the 105th Infantry, and one of his squad leaders, Sergeant Thomas A. Baker. 3 Marines each gallantly gave his life in the service of his country and were posthumously awarded the Navy Medal of Honor. They were Private First Class Harold C. Agerholm, Private First Class Harold G. Epperson, and Sergeant Grant F. Timmerman. The 3rd Battalion 10th Marines, which had fought so tenaciously in the Banzai assault, received the Navy Unit Commendation. 4 years later, the 105th Infantry and its attached tank battalion were awarded the Army Distinguished Unit Citation. While attention centered on the bloody battle on the coast, the 23rd Marines was attacking a strong Japanese force well protected by caves and a cliff inland. The key to their elimination was an ingenious improvisation. In order to provide fire support, truck-mounted rocket launchers were lowered over the cliff by chains attached to tanks. Once down at the base, their fire, supplemented by that of rocket gunboats offshore, snuffed out the enemy resistance. The next day, D+23, 8 July, saw the beginning of the end. The Japanese had spent the last of their unit manpower in the Banzai charge. Now it was time for the final American mop-up. LVTs rescued men of the 105th Infantry who had waded out from the shore to the reef to escape the Japanese. Holland Smith then moved most of the 27th Infantry Division into reserve and put the 2nd Marine Division back on the line of attack, with the 105th Infantry attached. Together with the 4th Marine Division, they swept northwards towards the end of the island. Along the coast there were bizarre spectacles that presaged a macabre ending to the campaign. The official Marine history pictured the scene. The enemy pocketed in the area had destroyed themselves in suicidal rushes from the high cliffs to the rocky beach below. Many were observed, along with hundreds of civilians, wading out into the sea and permitting themselves to be drowned. Others committed harakiri with knives or killed themselves with grenades. Some officers, using their swords, decapitated many of their troops. End of chapter 7.